Hi, this is Jen Pearson, and today I'd like to address some common concerns about homeschooling. I heard from a mom who would like to homeschool her daughter, who will be going into second grade, but her husband had some concerns. And these are concerns that I have heard before from parents and from others who are new to the homeschooling world. So I thought it would be good to create a little video and explain some of these concerns and kind of give you my answers to those concerns. So his first concern was that homeschool teaches kids that they can do whatever they want. And when they enter the real world, they won't be able to sit in a 9-to-5 job because they're used to that lack of structure. First of all, I'd like to say that your homeschool can be whatever you want. You get to base your school on whatever you think is important. So if you really think it's important for your child to be used to structure, to be able to sit for long periods of time and be bored, if you think it's important for them to learn to follow strict rules, then you can put that in place in your homeschool just like they do in school. That is entirely up to you. That's the beauty of homeschool, or one of the many beauties of homeschool, is that you get to decide for yourself. But I'm not so sure that learning to work within the structure of a school setting is really necessary for success in the world after school. So schools impose structure on children. They don't teach children to learn to structure their own activities. They don't teach children that self-discipline that they need to structure their own lives and set goals for themselves and achieve those goals. Yes, some kids get good at doing that in order to get their homework done, but often it's not the schools that are teaching them that. It's either the parents or the child sometimes picks it up on their own. The schools themselves, during the day, it's usually just imposed structure. So it may teach a child to deal with it or to live with it, but it doesn't really teach them how to structure things for themselves and how to set goals and meet goals for themselves. Also, the rules in school are that rhymes. They're much more restrictive than typical rules in a workplace. I really can't imagine anybody choosing to work at a job where they're forced to sit in a desk for pretty much the entire workday, and they're told to be quiet and do their work and not talk to their coworkers. They're not allowed to snack at their desk. They're not allowed to get up and stretch when they need to or walk around the room if they feel like that would help them think. And if they want to go to the bathroom, well, in this workplace, you have to raise your hand and ask to go to the bathroom, or you'd have to go when all of your coworkers go to the bathroom at the designated time. I really can't imagine any workplace being like that. And if it were, I don't think most people would want to work there. So the kind of structure that they have in schools is really extreme compared to what we face in the workplace as adults. So I'm not so sure that what they have in school is even in any way preparing kids for that. I know when I taught in college for 6 years before I started homeschooling my children, and I was teaching at Bellarmine University, and it always kind of cracked me up when I had students who would raise their hand and ask to go to the bathroom. And I finally started telling them at the beginning of every semester, I would say, you guys are adults now, and this is college. You don't have to ask to go to the bathroom. If you need to go to the bathroom, just go. And I even would tell them, if you need to get up and like stand in the back of the room and stretch or something, as long as you're not creating a big disturbance, I'm fine with that, because I think people learn better when they have that flexibility to move around a little bit. So typical elementary and middle and high schools aren't like that, but colleges are much more kind of accepting and free with that kind of behavior because they're treating their students like adults. And that's the kind of treatment we expect in the workplace too. So it's not really preparing them for the world of work to do what they are expected to do in school, like in the lower grades and even in high school. So let's see, there were a few other things. I took a few notes on what I wanted to say. The other thing is that schools are based on the premise that most jobs will require workers to be able to follow rules, deal with boredom most of the day, and operate within a structure that's imposed by managers and supervisors. But the problem is most jobs of the future, and especially the good paying jobs of the future, are not going to require those kind of skills. Those kinds of things, those menial, fairly thoughtless kind of jobs are going to be taken over in the future by computers and robots. And the good paying jobs are going to go to people who can think creatively, who can use critical thinking skills, and who can do problem solving, the things that computers can't do real well at this point. So I don't think schools necessarily prepare kids well for those kind of jobs. Schools tend to focus still, to a great extent, on finding that one right answer, the convergent thinking instead of divergent thinking. So we're teaching them to find the right answer, and we're teaching them to conform to the group. Because in schools, if you stand out in some way, if you're too much of an individual, then typically the kids kind of bully you and you're sort of forced to be like everyone else. And creative thinking is normally not real encouraged in schools. And certainly questioning the way things are done is not encouraged in a school setting. So the kinds of skills that kids will probably need in the next 10 to 20 years in the work world are not skills that are really valued or encouraged in a typical school setting at this time. So children aren't encouraged to take risks in school. They really aren't encouraged to think for themselves. And they are focused so much on getting good grades and getting the right answer on the test that they're not thinking in different ways, and they're not really learning to be creative. The school environment also has one other problem. It tends to relegate learning to within the walls of school and within like what is required for the test or the assignment that they have to complete. When I was volunteering at Girl Scout camp a few years ago, I had a girl in one of my groups. I forget, somebody used a word. I don't remember who it was, might've been me, used a word that she didn't understand. And she said, "What does that mean? I've never heard that." So I started giving the definition. And as soon as I defined the word, another girl in my group said, "Oh gosh, this sounds so much like school. This is summer. No learning, no learning. We don't learn in the summer." And I thought, what? You don't learn in the summer? Does that mean you don't learn anymore once you get out of school? Because that's the other skill that will absolutely be required in the future, lifelong learning, because we don't know what the world's going to look like in 10 or 20 years. So if children aren't taught to constantly be learning and constantly evolving their skills and their knowledge, then they will fall behind when they get out of school and are trying to get a job. They might get a job at first, but if you don't keep up with technology and all the latest things in your field, then you don't stay ahead in your job very long. So it's very important to me as a homeschooler that my children learn that learning is for life. And learning is not something that we do just for school. It's something that we do all the time, forever. I know one of the I can't say it was a deciding factor, but it certainly was something that helped to solidify my idea to homeschool, was when my daughter was in first grade. And she was actually in a Catholic school at that time. And I thought she was getting a pretty good education. And one night, I knew they were working on time, telling time in school. So one night it was past her bedtime, and I was trying to convince her to go to bed. So I pointed to the clock and I said, "Look at the clock. What time is it? It's after your bedtime." And she looked at the clock and she said, "Mom, I can't read that. We're only learning o'clock and 30, and we're done with time now, so I don't need to know that." And it was like, I don't know, like a shot to my heart. I was like, "What? You don't need to know that? What do you mean you're done with time?" And I told her, I was like, no, you will need time for the rest of your life. Like, you're going to need to understand time and tell time for life. This is not just something you need to know for school. But so often kids who are in school develop that mindset of, I learn it for the test, I take the test, and then I forget it. I don't need to learn it for anything other than that. And sadly, I think often they don't see the connection between what they're learning in school and the real world. So now as a homeschooler, I make an effort to really point out to my children how things apply in the real world, and how what we're learning, if we do learn in a school setting kind of, which we do some things out of workbooks and kind of sitting in a desk and that kind of thing. So those things I make an effort to really point out, well, these are the ways you might use this in the real world. But then we also do a lot of experiential learning where we do stuff. So we cook and we double recipes, or we have recipes, or we go for a nature walk, or we discuss like current events. So very often we have amazing conversations. Sometimes just driving in the car, we have conversations where I tell them about, hey, this is how the government works, and this is a problem that we're having because of that, or this is something that's going on that you might have heard about, and here's the science behind that, or whatever it is. We talk about things that are kind of school subjects, but we do it related to the real world and related to what's going on in the world around them. So they see that this isn't separated from real life. It's something that they need to know for life and to understand the world around them better. So I think it's important that learning be integrated into life and not something that's just relegated to schools and homework. And I think this concern really boils down to this question: what do you think it is important for your child to learn? And if it's important that they learn to follow rules and operate within a structure that's imposed by others, if it's important to you that they adjust to being bored most of the day, then maybe school is a good setting. I don't know. Or maybe you could just put that in place in your homeschool if that's important. But what I think you're really saying is that you want them to be successful in a job someday. And so let's really think about what's going to be necessary in the jobs of the future and the kind of job you hope they'll have. Like, do you hope they'll have a job where they're going to be sitting around bored all day? Probably not. You hope they'll have a job where they're able to enjoy it and be someone who is valued in that job and someone who can do a good job and have a career where they can advance and where they can make a decent living. So I think for that, they're going to need some pretty complex skills in the future. And they're going to need to be able to think in different ways and be creative, and even sometimes to question the way things have always been done. So those are skills you can certainly build into your homeschool. So another concern that her husband had was that there aren't any competition sports, and that as a homeschooler, they wouldn't be able to play sports on a team. So this is a common misconception and absolutely not true. At least here in Louisville, there are many, many opportunities. And I think that's true of most people who live within a range of a big city. Okay, I was locked up for a second there. In smaller cities, you might have more of an issue with the team sports. But here we have opportunities for them to compete at the YMCA. There are club sports. There is also a local homeschool cottage school that has sports that children can sign up for if they homeschool in Louisville. And there are also just opportunities for things like taekwondo, swimming, tennis, all of those just through independent businesses that offer that. So there are many sports activities and possibilities. Football seems to be about the only one that currently isn't available for homeschoolers in Louisville. But if you're Catholic, you can participate in sports through your church, the school that's associated with the church, as long as your children go to religious education classes. So most Catholic schools do have football teams. So if that were something that you were interested in, that's also a possibility if you're Catholic, and maybe something that will be available in the future. I'm not sure about that, but there are many other opportunities right now. Another concern that he said that homeschool kids are sheltered and they need to be bullied so they understand how to deal with it and can get out of those situations. So yeah, homeschool kids are sheltered, and I don't deny it. That's absolutely true. They're with their parents a lot more than most kids, and we have a little bit more control over what they're exposed to, who they're exposed to, and what kinds of experiences they have. But I don't think that's entirely bad. Sometimes it can be a benefit. When I pulled her out of school, I pulled her out right after first grade, and we decided to homeschool after that. And I still kept in touch with a lot of friends who had kids in the school, so I kind of knew what was going on. And when I heard that the little girls that were in her class, that were now little second graders, like 7 and 8 year olds, when I heard that they were starting to talk about dieting and needing to lose weight, I was really happy that my daughter was sheltered in the homeschool, because I just think it's horrible that kids that age are worried about their weight and already developing body image issues. So in that case, yeah, I was pretty glad she was sheltered because I did not want her to develop lifelong issues with weight and body issues and body image issues because of that peer influence in second grade. And a lot of parents actually pull their kids out of school because of bullying, because bullying can be very traumatic for kids and it can cause lifelong self-esteem issues. We think of bullying as a rite of passage, but it's really not. Many kids go through school without really ever being bullied. Now, some kids, you get picked on a little or teased a little, but that's not the same as bullying. And that's something that they'll encounter with other kids, even if they're homeschooled. But real bullying doesn't happen to everybody. And when it does, it can be really pretty bad for kids. It can cause a lot of stress. And studies have shown that kids, well, really anybody, we don't learn well when we're stressed. We can't create new memories when we're stressed. The stress hormone that's released in our brain actually prevents learning from happening. So, even just logically, if you think about it, if a kid is going to school every day and they're worried about being bullied, so they're worried about being embarrassed by this bully, or they're worried about being beat up by the bully, or whatever it is, if they're always worried about that, they're going to be focused on that, and they won't be focused on learning, listening to what the teacher's saying, doing their assignments, those sorts of things. So I don't know that bullying is very compatible with getting a good education. So do children need to be learn to be bullied and how to deal with it? Or do they need to be bullied in order to deal with it or learn how to deal with it? I don't think so. I think many children make it through school without being bullied, and I think they turn out just fine. And being bullied in school might either turn a child into a bully themselves when they're in a position of power over someone else down the road, or it might make them just learn to put up with it. It's called learned helplessness. If you're in a situation where something bad is happening to you and you find that you can't get out of that situation, you just learn to deal with it. You learn to be okay, fine, I'll just put up with this bullying. And so then down the road, if your child's in a job and they're being harassed, they'll be well, just like what happened to me in school, I'm just going to have to put up with it. And that's not, I don't think, what you want for your child. So the other problem with bullying in school is it's really a situation where the child can't get out of the situation. If you're in a job and you're bullied by your boss or a coworker, you can go to someone at a higher level and tell them what's happening. And there are legal ramifications to that. And you can get out of that situation. But in school, your child has to go to school. It's the law. And the bully has to go to school. So unless the bullying is so severe and so obvious to the teachers, that bully is going to still be in school with your child. So even if the child goes and tells a teacher or tells you and something is done, like the bully is punished or talked to, the child still has to deal with the fact that they are in school with that bully. So every day they have to see them and deal with them. And often telling on them can actually make the bullying worse. And often teachers and administrators kind of downplay bullying and don't want to get involved because often it's not something they witness. Bullies tend to be pretty good at doing it sort of in private, away from the teachers. So there aren't as many witnesses and people to corroborate your child's story about being bullied. So it just becomes one kid's word against another. And teachers don't like to get involved in stuff like that because they don't know what really happened. So it's a situation where your child is in a miserable situation and they can't get out of it. And there aren't a lot of good solutions to that. So homeschool kids, contrary to popular belief, are actually pretty social. There are many social opportunities for homeschool kids. They don't just sit at home and do their work like recluses. So they are often around other children. We have playgroups that meet regularly. There are cottage schools that meet 1 or more days a week. There are enrichment classes that children can take. So there are many times when they're away from you, they're out of the house, and they're around other kids. And bullying might still occur, even with homeschooled kids, although I have found it's less prevalent, and that's probably for a variety of reasons, but that's another conversation. But the difference is if bullying does occur with homeschooled kids, there's a lot more opportunity for the parents to get together, for one child's parent to contact the other and say, hey, your kid was doing some things that didn't seem real nice. I'd like to talk to you about it. Maybe we can work something out. And most homeschool parents are really invested in their children and in their children being good kids. Like they don't want their kids to be bullying other people's kids. So they'll probably be willing to sit down with the children, talk through it with them, come up with some kind of a solution, and really teach the kids how to deal with a bullying situation, not just for the child who's being bullied, but for the bully as well. And this can teach good social skills. How do you do conflict resolution? And too often that just doesn't happen in a school setting. So I don't know. I was bullied in school as a kid. I tried everything to get out of it. It didn't work. I finally had to go tell my parents, and then they had to like take it up the chain of administration in the school until finally somebody said something to the bullies and it stopped. But I still kind of had this reputation then as a tattletale, and it never really taught me how I was supposed to deal with it in the future. I mean, there's just not a good skill learned there, I don't think. So I think that kids learn better when their parents can be more involved and can talk to them about good problem-solving social skills. So another concern her husband had was that her child would be behind. And again, this is a huge concern for a lot of homeschoolers. I always hear that. Is my child behind? Am I doing enough? Are they learning? So it is a concern, and there are ways to deal with it. So first of all, I want to say that in a homeschool, one of the advantages is that a child can learn at their own pace. So if your child is learning and progressing, and they're doing it at a pace that you feel comfortable with and you feel like is challenging to them, then I think you're in a pretty good spot. But a lot of people do like to know that their child is on grade level. So doing the same things that their peers are doing who are in school. And there are ways to do that. There are lots of lists out there. There's Common Core that lists everything that happens in certain grades. And there are different books and resources as well that tell what children should learn at different grade levels. So you can always look at those to get a gauge for where your child should be. So the problem is sometimes a child can be on grade level, but still behind. Let me explain what I mean by that. So I think math is a good way to explain it. Because math is one of those skills or one of those subjects that has very discrete skills, at least the way we think about it. So a child could be going through school and they encounter a math concept, let's say multiplication. And let's say maybe they understand multiplication, but they really can't seem to memorize their multiplication tables. They're really struggling with it, and it's just very hard for them to memorize them. And so in school, what happens is they may get bad grades on the tests in that subject or that particular skill. And so they start to think, wow, I'm really bad at math. I got really bad grades in this. But the school doesn't stop the progress. Everybody in the class has to keep moving forward. So rather than doing things differently or helping the child to learn that, or maybe changing the curriculum or anything, they can't do that because they've got all these other kids. So they just move on. So the child gets some bad test grades, some bad assignment grades. They may get a bad grade that semester in math, or even for that whole year, depending on how bad the problem is. But unless they completely fail it, they get passed on. But now they have kind of a hole in their foundation. And a year or two or a few months down the road, when they encounter another concept that builds on that first concept. So let's say if the first one was multiplication, now they're multiplying fractions, or they're multiplying negative numbers, or something like that. Well, now they're like, whoa, I didn't get multiplication. I really don't get this. And it starts to compound the problem. And then that poor foundation, you're building on a bad foundation, and things start to crumble. And first of all, it hurts the child's self-esteem or their feeling of self-efficacy for math, which is feeling like they can do it. So they start to avoid math. They start to say that they hate math, and they develop this mindset of, I'm not good at math. So then other concepts down the road, they keep building on it, and they keep kind of falling into that hole that was created in that bad foundation. So it creates sort of a cascade effect of bad math grades, which then further compounds their idea that they're not good at math. So that's one problem. And then the other problem is that if you are able to go at their own pace and sort of slow it down and say, okay, you're having trouble with this concept. Let's see what we can do. So in a homeschool setting, you can do it differently because you don't have all the kids that you have to keep everybody on grade level. You can kind of stop, you can pause, you can go deeper into that concept until the child achieves mastery, and you can find different ways to teach it, that kind of thing. Or you can work around it. And you can say, well, let's just kind of skip that concept for now and move on to these other things that don't use that concept, and we'll circle back. My firm belief is in reading and math, I think a lot of it is brain development. Children develop at different rates. They are not all the same. And we realize this when kids are babies. When you go to the pediatrician, they don't say, well, let's see, your child is within a year of this date. So, or this date, they should be in this age range of a whole year. So they should be walking, they should be talking. They don't do that. They look and say, well, let's see, your child is 12 months old. They should be starting to say a few words here and there, or, within this range, they should be talking. And then, around 18 months to 2 years, they should be starting to make some sentences and saying more words. So it's a range though. But in elementary school, we say, well, as long as you turned this age by August 1st, I think it is now in Kentucky at least, then you should be able to be in this grade and function with all the other kids who turned this age by this date. And it's a whole year of age range. And some kids just don't develop as fast as others in certain subjects. It doesn't mean they're any less smart. Studies have actually shown that even kids who read later, it has, if they're within, let's say they read a year or two later, it doesn't really make a big difference in their overall achievement. Kids who read early, like kids who are just really doing great and they read at 4 or 3, studies have shown that has no bearing on their later achievement or their intelligence. It's just brain development. Some kids' brains develop faster than others. And I also think most kids, their brains do not develop the same in their language arts abilities and their math abilities. Almost always, they're asynchronous. I mean, literally, I don't think I've ever met a child or talked to a parent who says, oh no, my child is absolutely on the same level for math and language arts. It just doesn't happen that often, almost never. So the problem with school is we expect kids to be on the same level on both of those. And we pass them all along in the same cohort, the same grade, all the way through school. And it just doesn't work for most kids. So as a homeschooler, you have that opportunity to slow things down if you need to, and to make sure they have a solid foundation. Because then later, when their brain development catches up, they'll be able to learn faster and they'll have a good foundation to build on, so it won't hold them back in the long run. So that idea of being behind is a school idea and not one that you really have to worry about when you're homeschooling. The only time you have to worry about it is if you plan on sending your child back to school in the next year or so. But even then, I think being able to kind of dig deeper into a specific concept that they're having trouble with and try different methods and figure out if there's a workaround. Like my daughter struggled at first with learning multiplication tables, but I wanted to be able to move on to other concepts. So I said, okay, just use a calculator for now for the multiplication stuff. And we'll work on being able to do these other things like division and long division and everything, because I didn't want her to be held back by not being able to memorize the multiplication tables. But now she's actually starting to memorize them because she uses them a lot and because she's seeing the value in memorizing them. And she's a little bit older and better able to memorize things than she was when she was younger. So it's an individual thing. Some kids just need a little extra time on certain concepts. And being able to do that doesn't mean that they're behind. It means that they are getting a good foundation and they're getting what they need. So I think the other concern she mentioned that her husband had, and it's kind of related to this, is a lack of structure and not setting the bar high enough. So there's always that question of what is the bar? How do you know if you're doing enough? So again, this is up to you. You decide how much structure you want in your homeschool, what you're comfortable with, and what works best for you and your child. And if you value structure, and if it's important for you, for your child to be challenged, then you figure out a way to build that into your homeschool. And I think it's vitally important when you first start homeschooling to sit down and determine, first of all, what your values are. And I don't mean morals. I mean, morals are important and you want to pass those on to your kids, but that's not what I'm referring to. I mean, values like at your very core, what is important? Is it a love of learning? Is it lifelong learning? Is it the idea of really pushing yourself and working to your potential and achieving your potential? what is it? What are those things that are vitally important to you and your husband? You need to sit down and determine this together. And then you can build your homeschool on that. So you can figure out, based on those values, what are your goals? What do you have to do to achieve those goals? And what will your milestones and checkpoints be throughout the year to make sure that you're achieving those goals? So I think it's important to have that structure at sort of underlying your homeschool. And that will help to tell you if you're doing what you should be doing. And I think it's kind of easy as a homeschooler to tell if you're challenging your child enough, because you get to know them and you can see, is this super easy for them? Are they, I always tell my son, because he's kind of a perfectionist and he likes to get everything right. But I always tell him, I'm like, unless you're missing one or two of these, I know you're not being challenged enough. So if I give him, a worksheet or something and he's just whipping them out really fast and getting them all right, well, then he's not challenged enough. But as a homeschooler, I know I can just skip ahead, or I can move faster, or do something that will be more challenging for him. So I have that opportunity. How do we really know if our children are being challenged enough in school? A lot of kids aren't, because they're doing what all of their peers are doing. And even if they're getting straight A's, it may not be a challenge for them. So if your child being challenged and really working up to her potential is important, then figure out a way to periodically assess that and build in that into your homeschool. And one of the things I do is I work with parents to help them create that foundation and that structure in their homeschool. So when I coach a parent for the first time, we sit down first and we talk about, what are your goals and your values? What is it when you picture the future with your child? What do you want to see? Like, where do you think they're going? Where do you hope they're going? And then how can you get them there? And then we work backward from that point. And we set goals. We set, long-term goals as well as goals for this year. And then you have to dial that back even further and put in your milestones and checkpoints throughout your school year to make sure you're on track to hit those goals. Because otherwise you end up at the end of the year going, we didn't do any of this stuff, or we didn't do enough of this. And then you do feel behind. So maybe every month have a checkpoint where you say, well, how are we doing? What has been accomplished so far? And are we hitting the milestones? Are we where we should be? And then if you're not, you tweak and adjust as necessary. So homeschooling has a lot of benefits. And I also just want to encourage you and encourage your husband to not just think about the objections, because there are some things that, we might have as concerns with homeschooling. But if you think about it, you probably have concerns about regular school too. But we don't tend to dwell on those because everybody, like the majority of people, send their kids to school. It's the norm. So we only start to focus on our concerns when we go outside the norm. But try to flip that and think about all of the advantages of homeschooling. The fact that you can structure it to meet your child's needs. The fact that you can make sure that she's getting a solid foundation, or anybody who's listening, that your child can get a solid foundation for their education. And the fact that you can really encourage their interests and engage them and make them see that learning is fun and learning is related to life and it's lifelong. And the other advantages of homeschooling are that you have more family time, you have more flexibility in your schedule. You can do a lot more activities without it seeming overwhelming, because homeschooling doesn't take as much of your day and you don't have the travel time of dropping kids off at school and bringing them home and all that. You can also travel in the off season if you have that in your budget. So if you want to go to Disney, you don't have to go when everybody else is going. Although lately it seems like everybody goes to Disney throughout the year, but it's at least less crowded and less hot if you can go, say, in January or February, instead of only being able to go during school breaks. So there's advantages like that. There's just so many different advantages to homeschool that I think if you started focusing on those, you would be more happy with that choice and would realize that it could be a good choice for your family.